Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Gaurav Sharma and with me is Abhineet Shukla bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. UN climate talks in Scotland conclude with a global agreement aimed at keeping alive hopes of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav says India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership is walking the talk on combating climate change. Bulgaria goes to poll to elect president and new parliament. India International Trade Fair begins at Pragati Maidan in New Delhi. Virtual registration opens for the 52nd International Film Festival of India in Goa. And in Men's T20 World Cup, New Zealand set a target of 173 runs before Australia in the final at Dubai International Cricket Stadium. As India created history by administering over 100 crore vaccine doses against COVID-19, All India Radio salutes all the doctors, nurses, other frontline workers and all those who got vaccinated and made this possible. Even though the country has achieved this feat, we caution our listeners that the battle against COVID is not yet over. We appeal to our listeners to get fully vaccinated at the earliest and also help others get vaccinated. During the festival season, please follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now, the news in detail. UN climate talks in Scotland have concluded with a global agreement aimed at keeping alive hopes of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius and to maintain a realistic shot at saving the world from catastrophic climate change. Nations have accepted a compromise deal aimed at keeping a key global warming target alive, but it contained a last-minute change that watered down crucial language about coal. Alok Sharma, the conference chairman, banged down his gavel to signal that there were no decisive objections from almost 200 national delegations present in Glasgow on issues ranging from coal and gas-fueled superpowers to oil producers and Pacific Islands being swallowed by the rise in sea levels. Here's a desk report.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said in a statement that our fragile planet is hanging by a thread. The Glasgow Climate Pact is the first-ever climate deal to explicitly plan to reduce coal, the worst fossil fuel for greenhouse gases. Meanwhile, Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav said India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is walking the talk on combating climate change. In a tweet, he said, "We demand the same from the developed world." Earlier yesterday, Mr. Yadav took aim at a draft deal at the United Nations Climate Summit, saying he disagreed with the language on fossil fuel subsidies and that the draft lacked balance. In one of the strongest criticisms of the COP26 draft deal, Mr. Yadav said developing nations had the right to use the remainder of the so-called global carbon budget, or the amount of carbon dioxide the world can release before warming crosses the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. He asked how can one expect that developing countries can make promises about phasing out coal and fossil fuel subsidies when developing countries have still to deal with their development agendas and poverty eradication. The issue of subsidies for oil, gas and coal has become a major sticking point at the summit, where negotiators have already missed a Friday deadline to strike an agreement aimed at keeping alive a goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Mr. Yadav also criticized what he described as lack of balance in the agreement, an argument developing countries have made before when pushing for more money to better adapt their countries to deal with the effects of climate change. Prashant Kumar Sinha for World News.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring to you a discussion on the takeaways from the Glasgow Climate Pact. In conversation are Dr. C.K. Varshney, an environmentalist, and Chetan Chauhan, a journalist.
United Nations Climate Conference in Glasgow today ended a day after the scheduled time on Friday. Over 197 countries agreed to a political outcome called Glasgow Pact that would take the world to the 2-degree path and will not restrict the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees as envisaged in the Paris climate deal. It has also shown the fault lines in the combative political will of the world to tackle climate change. Though there are some positives in terms of taking the process forward for Egypt next year, where a lot of work will have to be done. But as such, it appears that it is dismal. For Indians, I think the one positive point is that the word phasing out of coal and fossil fuel subsidy is not there in the text. It speaks about that phase down coal and fossil fuel, which is slowing down the use of coal and fossil fuels. There's also some mention of CBDR in the text, which India has welcomed. With all this, we have Dr. Varshney with us to discuss it. Dr. Varshney, what do you think about the Glasgow climate deal or the political decisions today?
As you have rightly said, that the expectations were very high, but somehow the outcome has been not that it will reach us to 1.5 target that we desire to achieve. If we take all the commitments that have been made, then it will be well over about 2.4 degrees, which is way above 1.5, which is expected. Today we have already crossed 1.2. And therefore, the immediate need is to have a crash program, which does not seem to be coming from this COP26 meeting that has taken place. It has made very laudable achievements, which are futuristic. Still 10 years to go. And the climate change is moving very fast. In fact, it is already creating lot of calamity in various parts in different ways. You can see that what is happening in our South India. I mean, the Chennai has received a kind of rainfall which it has never expected. And now today there is a red-orange alert in Kerala. So you can see that in Kerala, there have been repeated bouts of heavy rain, which is causing enormous damage to the people, to their health, as well as to the economy and the infrastructure. And more importantly, this kind of climate disruption causes severe, I should say, the supply chain disruption, which is very, very obvious. And I think the world has learned that no single country can afford to remain isolated and can insulate itself from the global problem. It's a global problem where everybody has to contribute. One or two things I would like to point out, that because of the net zero, we have sacrificed common and but differentiated responsibility principle. We have also sacrificed the question of polluter pays principle, which were the initial understanding with which the climate convention was started. So you see the basic tenets with which the world governments have agreed to begin with are nowhere there. And all of us are on the same platform. And each one of us required to really commit ourselves, and which has achieved. So it is a question whether it is tactically being postponed for a future date, or is it that developed countries have found out a method to overcome and to really water down their responsibility. If you take the legacy emission, which should have been the basis of really deciding carbon emission in the immediate future and over a period of time to achieve 1.5 within the limit. Even 1.5 is very high. It does not mean that everything will be hunky-dory and everything will be fine. But the question is that even this has not been achieved. So, for many, it is a very disappointing. For others, it provides certain hope because it is going to really revise and expect the revision will take place and will become more ambitious in the Egypt next year. So what next year is going to be is something entirely new, and nothing can be said in between what is going to happen. And I think the question of pandemic that we are suffering from has very clearly shown that the global problems have to be attacked globally, and not that they should be really be unified in terms some are causing, but the developing countries which have inadequate finances, which have very poor economies, they are the worst sufferer and become most vulnerable of the climate change that is unfolding very fast.
Dr. Varshney, one of the biggest issues which I think has been gripping the debate on climate change, one of the major issues at the Glasgow conference, where the Glasgow Pact also says that the climate finance is not adequate. They have expressed a deep regret that enough has not been given on climate finance. As the numbers we know, it was about $79 billion in 2019. The numbers during the pandemic did not increase at all. It has in fact gone down. And now the deadline, which was earlier 2020 for delivering 100 billion, has been shifted to 2025. So, and the money for another important aspect, adaptation to the vagaries of climate change, is there in the text. They speak about doubling the amount paid in 2019, but if you see the money given in 2019 were very minuscule, very little. So there is not much on that also. Third important aspect was on loss and damage, which was decided in Warsaw in 2013. 8 years down the line, we are still discussing it. There is no final agreement on the mechanism on how the countries will be compensated for climate change-induced disasters. So money is a very important aspect of the climate change discussion in Glasgow, and we have seen that there has not been much forward movement on that, even though the developing countries have been pushed to take on mitigation measures much more than before. Like they have been asked to do net zero, which to me is absolute zero, because nobody knows what will happen in 2050, 60 or 70. Most of us would not be alive by then. So, Dr. Varshney, the climate finance aspect is very important because the technologies needed to combat climate change is with the rich countries. Developing world don't have them and they are very costly. So, what do you have to say about that?
I think you have made the point very clear that most of the commitment which was expected from the developed countries, and particularly climate finance, to which you have already mentioned, they have always been dragging their feet. And there is no reason why they have not been able to provide the finances that they have promised 10 years ago. And the fact of the matter is, even whatever they have provided, if you really take an analytical and if you examine them, that what it consists of, then most of it are the loans. And the climate finance was not supposed to be the loans. It was the money to be given for the developing countries or for the poor countries to really meet their requirements for cutting down and adopting technologies which are not carbon intensive. So you see that what was expected, what was the true spirit of it, has also been violated. And one of the important things that you should realize that the whole text, except for subsidies of a journal word that has been added for fossil fuel, the petrol and petroleum and oil word doesn't exist at all. If you take any of these outcomes, nowhere you will find that such word exists. There was a big contingent. In fact, it was the largest contingent which was represented by oil body or oil producers. And that is a reason that the kind of business interest which has prevailed. So I think it is a profit which has really, and the personal interest and the narrow national interest of the developed countries which have been successfully navigated through this. At the same time, a facade has been created that we are very keen and we would like to do. Repeatedly, they have really violated and have really been very short of their commitment. So it is not once, it is many times that they have repeated this in the global body. For example, the Kyoto Protocol targets were, again, they were not able to meet. The finance they are not able to meet, and the agreed principle of common and differentiated responsibilities has been left in abeyance, and there is no mention of it. At the same time, every country is required to really commit to the climate neutral or carbon neutrality by 2050 or by 2060 or whatever it is. And you rightly say that is a long time, and we do not know what is going to happen. In fact, what we needed was an immediate crash activity so that the wheels of improvement of climate can start right away, which has been postponed, which means that next year the things are going to be more serious, more funds will be required, and this is where that they are going to be the main bottleneck. And unless that is really opened up and loosened, I am not very hopeful that much will be attained or achieved during the intervening period from now to Egypt and even thereafter, if the conditions and diplomatic maneuvers remains the same to safeguard the money. Now, this is a very real challenge that we are facing. And these are the real issues which ought to have been discussed there in a big way. But somehow they remain in the background and only provided with a hope that something will be done and we will try to do this and we will try to do that. These are very, very lovely and sugar-coated words. But we need action which seems to have been not forthcoming in the measure and with kind of commitment that one was expecting.
Dr. Varshney, one of the highlights of the Glasgow conference was the Prime Minister's announcement of India's commitment for 2030 period as well as the net zero. But if you see, India has given a highly ambitious target for itself for 2030, which is that 50% of our energy needs will be met through renewables, which I think will give a lot of push to electric vehicles, solar energies, wind energy, and will transform the economy to a large extent. So, India has tried its best, but others are not doing much. So, do you think that India would be able to achieve its target by 2030?
I think the targets are very ambitious, and in fact, they should have encouraged others to come forward with equal amount of, enthusiasm, but which has not happened. As regards your question whether we will be able to achieve it or not, Chetan, you must understand that it all requires finances. The Prime Minister has also mentioned during his speech after making all these commitments that we require 1 trillion, not 100 billion. And I think nobody further took those things forward. That really lost into the arguments and discussion. And it has never been again taken up. So I think these are the questions where pick and choose has been done so craftily that what suits the developed countries has been picked up and what they are supposed to do and discharge their duty has been left in abeyance. And not only abeyance, it has been completely forgotten. And with a bold face, they were able to say that we are not able to achieve. I do not understand that how and what makes them so confident of pressurizing other countries and not fulfilling their own small commitment of mere 100 billion. In fact, it should be raised to more than 10 times minimum. Even that is not enough. But that will help a great deal to provide some kind of a succor to the poor developing countries which require, and for them it is the existential crisis. And it is not a crisis which is going to come in future. It's an immediate crisis. And in fact, it is already going on. I must also say that to really have carbon neutrality, you have to have healthy ecosystems.
With this, I would like to thank you, Dr. Varshney, for joining us. Thanks a lot.
Bulgarians went to the polls on Sunday to elect a president and a National Assembly. 23 candidates, including current President Rumen Radev, are running for president, while 20 parties and 7 coalitions are taking part in the elections. Nearly 13,000 polling stations across the country and 750 more in 68 other countries were open for 6.7 million eligible voters. The official result of the presidential election must be released no later than Tuesday evening, with those for the parliament on Thursday. The president is elected directly by the people for a period of 5 years. To be elected, a candidate for president shall require more than half of the valid ballots, provided that more than half of all eligible voters have cast their ballots in the election. Radev's term will expire at the end of January 2022. The National Assembly is Bulgaria's legislative body. It has a 4-year term and parties and coalitions need to gain at least 4% of votes to enter the parliament. This is the 3rd parliamentary election this year. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal has said that initiatives of the India International Trade Fair (IITF) are reflective of the resilience of the Indian economy bouncing back. Mr. Goyal was speaking after inaugurating the 40th IITF in New Delhi on Sunday. The minister said the trade fair, which is one of the finest and country's largest convention centers, will come up in the Pragati Maidan complex. Mr. Goyal said the launch of this trade fair reflects the 5 sutras of Indian economy, exports, infrastructure, demand and diversity.
I can very proudly say that the India International Exhibition and Convention Center being developed in Pragati Maidan will be amongst the best in the world and will truly attract a lot of attention, a lot of huge trade fairs coming up in the years to come also, and will become a unique symbol reflecting the growing strength and vibrancy of a new India. In fact, I do believe Pragati Maidan will be scripting a new chapter in the growth story of India.
Mr. Goyal complimented the IITF organizers for consistently holding the fair and attracting lakhs of visitors. The theme of this year's fair is Atmanirbhar Bharat. Mr. Goyal said that this edition of the IITF is seeing a record participation as more than 3,000 small and big businesses are taking part in it. The minister lauded the organizers for providing free stalls for women and MSME entrepreneurs. He said other MSMEs, including startups, have been given a 40% discount by the ITPO. The fair will continue till the 27th of this month. The annual event, which witnesses a record footfall, was not held last year due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Bihar is the partner state, whereas Uttar Pradesh and Jharkhand are the focus states. As many as 9 foreign countries, including Bangladesh, Bahrain, Ghana, Kyrgyzstan, Tunisia, Turkey, Sri Lanka and the UAE are participating in the fair.
The biggest ever Dubai Air Show began at Al Maktoum International Airport, Dubai World Central, on Sunday with more than 1,200 exhibitors taking part in the 5-day show. Dubai Air Show is also the largest of its kind since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The show also features more than 160 of the world's most advanced aircraft on the ground and in the air. Indian Air Force IAF contingent is also taking part in the Dubai Air Show following invitation by the government of UAE to participate with the Sarang and Surya Kiran aerobatics teams. These teams will be performing along with some of the best aerobatics and display teams in the world, including the Saudi Hawks, Russian Knights and the UAE's Al Fursan. In addition, the IAF's light combat aircraft Tejas will be part of the aerobatics and static displays during the show. The Dubai Air Show will be the first occasion for the Surya Kirans and the Tejas to show off their swashbuckling aerial maneuvers.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi transferred the first installment of the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin PMAYG to more than 1,47,000 beneficiaries of Tripura through video conferencing on Sunday. More than 700 crore rupees were credited directly to the bank accounts of the beneficiaries on the occasion. Speaking on the occasion, the Prime Minister said the first installment of PMAYG has given a new impetus to the dreams of Tripura and the entire northeast region is witnessing a change.
आज हमारा त्रिपुरा और समूचा पूर्वोत्तर ऐसे ही बदलाव का साक्षी बन रहा है। आज प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना के तहत दी गई पहली किस्त ने त्रिपुरा के सपनों को भी नया हौसला दिया है। मैं पहली किस्त का लाभ पाने वाले करीब 1.5 लाख परिवारों को, सभी त्रिपुरा वासियों को हृदय से बधाई देता हूं।
The Prime Minister stressed that the development of the country today is seen with the spirit of Ek Bharat, Shresht Bharat. He said the development is now considered synonymous with the unity and integrity of the country.
हमारी कोशिश यही रही है कि हमारे देश के हर नागरिक को उसका हक बिना किसी परेशानी से मिलना चाहिए, कोई बिचौलिया नहीं। पहले क्या होता था कि कोई योजना असली लाभार्थी तक पहुंच ही नहीं पाती थी, अरे लाभार्थी की सूची तक नहीं बनती थी। हमने इसको बदलने की कोशिश की है और जागरूक नागरिकों की मदद से हमें इसमें बहुत सफलता भी मिली है।
Over 112 crore 1 lakh COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered in the country so far under the nationwide vaccination drive. More than 57,43,000 vaccine doses were administered in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, over 11,000 new COVID-19 cases were reported in the country in the last 24 hours, while more than 11,376 people recovered. Union Health Ministry said The COVID recovery rate in the country now stands at 98.26%, which is the highest since March last year.
In Ecuador, at least 58 prisoners were killed and 12 others injured in clashes at a jail in the city of Guayaquil. According to the local authorities, the clashes occurred between Friday night and early Saturday in the Literal Penitentiary, and the police intervened to regain control of the situation. The incident was driven by power struggles between groups linked to drug trafficking. Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso decreed in September a state of emergency in the country's prisons after a bloody confrontation in the Literal Penitentiary left 118 dead.
5 new integrated checkposts, ICPs, will be set up on the India-Bangladesh border in West Bengal to ensure better connectivity and security. The decision was taken during the high-level meeting of the Union Home Secretary Ajay Bhalla with senior officials of West Bengal government in Kolkata on Friday, said the Land Port Authority of India, LPAI. In total, 7 ICPs will be set up in West Bengal, which will strengthen border security and boost trade with India's neighbouring countries.
Moving on to sports now, and in cricket, Australia have won the Men's T20 Cricket World Cup, beating New Zealand by 8 wickets in the final at the Dubai International Stadium tonight. Australia overhauled the victory target of 173 runs set by New Zealand in just 18.5 overs for the loss of 2 wickets. Mitchell Marsh, with 77 unbeaten, was the top scorer for Australia. Earlier, riding on skipper Kane Williamson's impressive knock of 85 runs, New Zealand scored 172 for 4 wickets in the stipulated 20 overs. Australia skipper Aaron Finch won the toss and elected to bowl. And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Globe and Mail reports COP26 summit ends with agreement endorsed by almost 200 countries, but skepticism remains. The Washington Post reports it is not enough. World leaders react to COP26 climate agreement. The Wall Street Journal writes, in COVID-era experiment, Malaysia tries dramatic reduction in migrant labor. Sputnik News writes, Austria becomes world's first country to impose COVID-19 lockdown on unvaccinated. The Washington Post reports Gaddafi's son to run for president of Libya as December elections loom. Financial Times writes, at least 68 dead in latest prison violence in Ecuador. Ceylon Today writes, Russia starts missile supplies to India despite US sanctions risk. And before we end the news, a quick look at the headlines once again. UN climate talks in Scotland conclude with a global agreement aimed at keeping alive hopes of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav says, under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, is walking the talk on combating climate change. Bulgaria goes to poll to elect president and new parliament. India International Trade Fair begins at Pragati Maidan in New Delhi. Virtual registration opens for 52nd International Film Festival of India in Goa. And in cricket, Australia win Men's T20 World Cup, beating New Zealand by 8 wickets in the final at the Dubai International Cricket Stadium. India is celebrating the 152nd birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Cyprus.
Okay.
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.